The lesson.
Oh yeah.
Somewhere in that early phase where you're going to uni or you're in high school, somewhere in there you were part of a crew called Crooked Eye Crew, and that had Phases and Phrase as part of the crew.
Yeah, so Crooked Eye was Dan Merriweather, Phrase, Jay Scoob, DJ Flagrant, and Phases, and myself. And yeah, Phases came on a little bit later, but basically I'd been, playing these open mic nights and around Melbourne, sort of gold coin donations. And this is, I came up with sort of 60 and Pegz and Mantra and Iron Projects and there was a lot of talent at that time, but we were all kind of like, there was sort of the more hardcore, everything was underground, but there was sort of the sort of Broken Tooth dudes, and they had their scene, and our scene was very separate, and ours was much smaller. But that's what we were kind of doing, and Merriweather and Phrase came to one of the open mics one night, and Dan saw me on stage, kind of liked what I was doing, said come through to their studio. And they had a studio on Izzet Street where the old Obese used to be, just down the road from Obese. And, I went in there and, that was my first experience with a real studio. And they kind of took me under their wing, and I ended up hype manning for Phrase for 2006, 2007. And, that was kind of like, and into 2008 as well. And that kind of was my apprenticeship really in music, and they showed me the ropes, and it was like it was such a good time because there was no expectation. I was just there and enjoying the ride, and I was hustling back home to make money so that I could go there and do that, and yeah, it was just fun, man. It felt like the first step to making a real career in music.
And then I think it was off the back of that you dropped your first mixtape, like the Illy mixtape.
That's right. Yeah, 2007 was the Illy mixtape, and 2008 did Volume 2. So they were the first two sort of recorded things. On CD, like printing out mixtape CDs and handing them out at gigs, like a lost art form. But yeah, that was the first releases I put out.
And then, not on that release, but around that time, so maybe just after that release in 2007, you featured on a track, I think it was with Pegz and Draft. And that was on Pegz' album Burn City. So how did you go from, dropping this one mixtape to then linking up with someone like Pegz, who at the time was, one of the biggest names in the whole country?
Right. Well, yeah, man. I mean, like I said, the Crooked Eye studio was just down from Obese. So if you liked Australian hip hop and you were like a kid, you idolized Obese. And particularly if you're from Melbourne, like going to Izzet Street and the store was like a pilgrimage, you'd be at school, you'd be like, yo, I'm gonna go out there on the weekend, and you just go in there and fucking talk shit, like Bias or whoever would be behind the counter, like people would be there. It was really like you just wanted to be around it. So that was always the aim, even at Crooked Eye, I loved the boys, and I loved I loved what they'd done for me, but it became kind of apparent at some point that, I was only going to get so far staying with Crooked Eye, and I'd known Pegz because we'd been so close in the studio, because our studios have been so close, we'd often all be drinking in the park, and I had a chance to get in his ear and show him my mixtapes and blah blah blah, and he liked what I was doing, so he offered me a deal, and yeah, part of that, I guess part of the sort of process to sway me to join Obese was getting me on his album. And I can't remember the name of the track, but I know my verse. Before I Leave, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah, man. I mean, that was kind of how that came to be, and you know, everyone, like you say, everyone loved Axis and Capricorn Cat, and Pegz was, as far as Melbourne goes, you know, he ran Obese, so he had the keys to the whole fucking country as far as Australian hip hop for young Melbourne artists and fans. Yeah.
And then, so as I'm looking at my notes, just in that early, you know, just those early stages for you when you've started recording and releasing, the pool of names that you're just around, you know, from the early days, like your M Phases, your Phrase, your Pegz, your Draft, Jace of Beatheads. It's like you've really come up in very good Melbourne soil.
Yeah, well, I mean, Phases moved down from Gold Coast in like 2007, and we'd like met prior to then, but he came down and Flago was DJing for Phrase. So I was the other dude in the crew. Merriweather had gone off to the UK by this time. You know, he was doing his shit with Mark Ronson, and Phases came in and was like, all right, well, what are you gonna do? He's like, well, I'll DJ for Al, you know. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. So it just was being in the right place at the right time, and you know, like, you know, that's my homie from that day forward. You know, he's been instrumental in my career until the last album. So it was just, you know, I was very fortunate to be put in with, I had for like, yeah, the first sort of 5 years of my touring career, the best producer that Australia's ever, you know, produced, as my dude sitting in the passenger seat in the fucking Yaris as we took on the country.
The lesson. 927. Oh yeah.